Hey, this is Kate Kaplan with Nielsen Norman Group. We've just wrapped our first ever NNG virtual UX conference, where hundreds of attendees from 46 countries joined us remotely for 7 full days of professional UX training and networking. To cap off this special event, Jakob Nielsen joined us for a live Q&A session where attendees asked him to share his perspective on UX team dynamics, UX and current events, and the future of our industry. Let's take a look.
So Jacob, if you're ready, the first question that I'd like to ask you is kind of about the individual and the UX professional and career development. And this question is actually from Manisha in the US. If you had to pick 3, what would you say are the main skills a UX researcher should learn early on in their career?
Well, for research, we always say there are 3 things you do when you do or should do when doing user research, which is have representative users, have them do representative tasks, real world tasks, and you shut up and let the user do the talking. So those 3 sound very simple, but they're actually 3 kind of complex skills, really exactly how to get hold of the right users. Tasks writing, the entire thing about being real world is actually, there's a lot of detail there. And then finally, shut up sounds easy, but actually facilitation, if you're going to make it a little bit more general. Those are 3 kind of complex skills, and those are the foundation of any research method. So for researchers, I would say those are the 3. But then to kind of cheat, there's actually one more, because you can do like the most perfect research, right? And it does no good if it just sits on the shelf or sits on a file directory somewhere. So the additional skills, kind of orthogonal skill, is communication skills, which I would hope people have learned, before, but honestly, most people don't know how to do it right. So anything from writing to speaking, whether it's speaking in public or whatever, all those things are not research-specific skills, but they're super important for success in a real project.
On the other side, we had an attendee, actually a couple of attendees raise this question of, what do you think is the biggest mistake you see designers make earlier in their career?
I think they're almost 2 opposite mistakes people tend to make, and it's either being too self-confident or too insecure. So opposites, right? But definitely return back to this question about research. If you're too confident in just like your own opinion or your own judgment or your own like design elegance or whatever, and you ignore the users, right? That I think is a really classic mistake. And then on the other hand, there's the opposite mistake, which is being so insecure. Oh, we need like data for everything. No, I mean, you're not going to have like statistically significant, like to the 5th decimal point data for everything. You got to just make some decisions as well. So you got to, on the one hand, trust your skill and professional judgment, and on the other hand, not actually trust it too much, not be just think, oh, I am the expert, so I know everything. No, you don't know everything, but you do know something. So that kind of middle ground is where you should be.
So with those being both focused on kind of getting into UX and for more inexperienced professionals, looking at the more experienced professionals that are trying to get into UX at a little bit later stage in their career, what advice do you have for kind of selling yourself and showing your value without sacrificing the compensation?
That I think is a very, very difficult question. The only real way to sort of preserve your status or salary, I guess, is really to stay in your current job and pivot there. Because if you're going to go out and apply for a new job as a new UX specialist, I mean, people are going to judge you as such. And you're not going to be treated very senior, even if you're 50 years old. I mean, it's not the age that counts, it's the experience or the knowledge, I should really say. But on the other hand, in your current job, you know a lot about how to do that product, how to deal with that company, all the structures and how things are done and everything. And so in your current job, I think this is, of course, assumes you can get some permission, but you can also actually do it just as what we call skunk work, so you can just kind of do it almost without permission. Like say simple usability studies can be done without permission, right? And so if you stay in your current job and twist it gradually to become more and more and more and more UX oriented, and that's often the way that you become that company's designated UX expert, just because you built it yourself. This is, you start from nothing and you just little by little by little by little, you build it up. And now 2 years later, you're the guru, right? And you retained all the status you had before.
Very nice. So kind of thinking about at an organizational level, for organizations that have some UX on their staff, but maybe their culture hasn't quite shifted to be user-centered yet. How do you shift an organization's culture to be more user-focused when they're still stuck in those old-fashioned ways?
That's tough because culture is not something that changes very fast. And this is, by the way, also one of the classic design mistakes we make as well. If we design something that only works if everybody changes the way they do everything, it's kind of doomed. And it's a little bit the same about doing UX work. If you assume that all other people in the company should immediately recognize that our way is the right way and they have to change all their set ways that they've done for 30 years, and that's just not going to happen. So you've got to change them on a more gradual note. And this is why we have this concept called UX maturity levels. And one of the big experiences we've had for many years of doing this work is you can't jump from very low level maturity to very high level maturity in 1 year. I mean, you can expedite it if there's extremely strong backup from very senior management, like particularly actually in newly formed companies where the founder is somebody who is a UX person often. I mean, Google is a great example of that because they started by two actually graduate students in our field. But that's not an established company, that's a new company. An established company, it's gonna take some time. It may take as much as 10 years, maybe more. And you're just gonna sometimes a little bit suffer that and proceed gradually. Because if you assume you're gonna make the big leap, you're just gonna like try to like make a jump like this and you smash and you fall. So that's going to be a doomed project. So you've got to do it gradually.
When you're a UX professional, you're working with a lot of different groups. You're working with project managers, you're working with developers and such. And this question was raised a couple of times, kind of thinking about when you're working with all of these different teams, you're advocating for the user, but they have needs too. Those teams have needs as well. So how do you balance and negotiate different features and UI components? And how do you decide when is a good time to compromise?
Well, I mean, everything is a compromise. That's, of course, a lesson is very hard for me because I'm very strong-minded and I really want the user interface to be perfect and every little detail to be exactly right. And you've got to accept that that's not going to be the case. And so we do have a lot of prioritization methods where we can prioritize, you know, what are the things that's going to matter, have the most business value and the most user value. And so that's already a compromise there. And I think you're more likely in the long run to get through with things that have high business value because, you know, the next year you can say, wow, you know, we increased revenue by 10% or we made millions of you know, pounds or whatever. That's going to be good sort of for next time to argue why they should listen to you. But of course, things that have high user value are the things we're supposed to also advocate for, and they will have business value in the long run from more loyal customers. So if you have that prioritization, the things that fall low on business value or user value, maybe you don't fight those battles if somebody, so you really have to have a multidimensional, which makes it hard, multidimensional prioritization matrix. So we usually talk about UX value versus kind of cost in terms of implementation. So the engineers tell us, you know, this is going to cost us like enormous work. And we say, well, it's going to improve usability a little bit. Don't do that. Well, we can have like another dimension, which is more kind of, I guess, organizational resistance or how obnoxious people are about not wanting to do certain things. And then maybe again, that's another trade-off parameter. That is, there's a lot of resistance to something, then you only really fight for it if it's super important, right? If it's only medium important, usually we would say medium important, we would still like to do. But if there's strong resistance, maybe you wait for next year, right? Maybe you accumulate more, you know, videos from usability studies that you show at sort of selected times at various meetings, and gradually people understand they should make that change, but you're not going to get it through, you know, right away.
At our conference too, we talk about this concept of empathy, and I think it's very well known now that empathy is kind of at the heart of our field, but sometimes, especially working with leadership, empathy can be seen as a bit of an abstract concept. This was asked by one of our attendees. How can data gained from empathy be of real value to the UX team in the larger organization?
Well, in some sense, maybe that's not hard data, right? It's more soft data, more of a feeling. And I don't think that makes it invalid or something one shouldn't push for. But again, going back to what I was saying before, that the harder business value, the measurable, revenue numbers, and so are the ones that are easier to get through. The ones that are more the user value, or we know that people really struggle with, so that way, that's where the empathy comes into play. And that's more something I think you've got to build up more gradually. And as the team becomes more user-centered, and maybe the organization grows as a whole, grows in that maturity, UX maturity level, more of them will have exposure to users or to customers. I mean, I always like to say nobody should be allowed to work on a project if they haven't at least once seen a customer. But that's again already a medium level of maturity to have everybody once seen a customer. But many times seen a customer, that's certainly higher levels of maturity. And it's only really that can build true empathy. I mean, you can write endless reports, give presentations, and if you have great presentation skills, you can hopefully convince them more. But that's not real empathy, right? That's only maybe like, hopefully you can get some understanding there, but you can't get empathy just from you lecturing. So the team members have to see customers themselves, and that again takes a little bit of time. So again, I just think many of these questions we've had now really come back to kind of a prioritization or understanding of what can you do at which stages of maturity. And at the lower level of maturity or earlier in a company starting to do kind of real user experience work, there are fewer types of things you can do. It's just we have to recognize that. But okay, let me just flip the coin there. Because on the other hand, early in the game, you have all these so-called low-hanging fruit. I mean, there's so many low-hanging fruit. I mean, I loved, honestly, when we started Nielsen Norman Group, so this is now in 1998, that was such a beautiful time to be a consultant and starting a consulting company in this field, because the user interfaces were so terrible. I mean, honestly, this is true stories. I mean, we go into a company and like spend less than 1 day there, right? And we could tell them how to double their business. It was like shooting fish in a barrel because the .com interfaces were so bad. And many of these e-commerce companies, you could hardly buy anything. So just like take this, spinning thing off your homepage and right next day you double your sales, right? I mean, so honestly, it's actually very happy. When things are really bad, it can also be happy because it means that there are certain things we can make that are easy changes that will have a huge impact. Later on, you need much more deep understanding. There are harder things that we need to work on. And that's when we need more of a true team support and all that.
Kind of related to that, again, in this realm of measuring what we do, how can we measure whether an organization is following those UX best practices? And this is from Anna in Germany.
Right. Well, there's sort of two ways of doing it, I would say. And the first way is a very simple, simplistic checklist approach, which is that we have, as you know, a very large number of methodologies. And we even have some articles on our websites and courses at these conferences where we talk about when to do what and all that. And so that's the first step. It's just basically checklist of, are you doing these things that you're supposed to do early in the design process, in the middle of the design process, to late in the design process? How many of the things that we recommend do you actually do? And that's relatively easy to do. And again, early in the maturity levels, you shouldn't assume that you're going to do everything, because you don't have the budget, you don't have the staff, you don't have organizational awareness to do these things. So don't aim for that. But you should at least do a few of the most basic things. And later on, you should do more things. So you could just checklist, check. Yeah, I do this. No, I don't do that. And you count how many things you do. Now, that's a simplistic approach, and it's not really enough, but it's a good start. And the reason it's not really enough is that it's not enough to do something. You have to also do it right. And actually, maybe it's a third thing, and then you have to act on it as well. And so those two additional points become things you then secondarily have to measure. And this is harder because you probably think you do things right. Let's say, for example, usability testing, which is our most basic method. And so you can say yes or no, do you do usability testing, right? First of all, some people don't understand the difference between that and focus groups. They say, yeah, we already talk to users. That's not a valid check item. So you've got to first of all say, are we actually doing it right? So if we say usability testing as an example, is it one-on-one? Do you shut up, let the user do the talking? You're not doing demos, you're giving them real-world tasks, all these things. So that's the first thing. Then there's like the quality, how well do you really do it? How insightful are you in analyzing what's going on? That's hard for yourself to judge because of course you think you're insightful, So that's something maybe you get a colleague or somebody else to sort of assess whether it's going well or not. And then the last point is it actually being implemented, right? So when you come up and say, we really should make the following changes as design, are those changes made? And I have to say that this is never the case that everything is done. I mean, we've sometimes done projects where we have a client and we give them a report that says, okay, here's like 100 things we recommend you do. And then sometimes we'll come back next year and they'll hire us to do like a review, we call it. So like, we're going and check. So we'll just check on these 100 things we recommend, say, did they actually do them? And if they did, usually people only do half of the recommendations. And that's actually, okay, well, that's fine. You can't do everything, right? And so 100% is not even the true goal necessarily. But if they only did 10% of the recommendations, then there's something wrong. And so those are additional things that you can, or you should look at after the very first step, which is just checklist. Are you doing some of the recommended things or not? If yes, how well are you doing them? If you think you're doing them well or correctly and well, then are people doing what you tell them? And so there are all these places that it can break down. But first of all, it breaks down if you don't do it, because if you don't do it, for sure, you're not going to have any results. And if you do it poorly, actually, even if you do it poorly, you'll probably have some results. If you do it well, you'll have many more results. And then there's that transition between results in the UX team and results in the product. And of course, they have to be in the product to give you that business value that we like to talk about.
So when talking about kind of how UX maturity can make a difference in some of these situations, looking at some of those more maybe high mature UX organizations that have a lot of designers, do you have any advice for a UX team where, yes, there are a lot of designers, but they have competing visions, and that's kind of taking precedence over some of the actual insights to be implemented? That's
a much harder problem, I think. So that goes back to the, I think, concept of user experience architecture. And so you have to have an overreaching vision, and you cannot have, if you have individual people's visions, then you're going to end up with something like Linux. I mean, Linux is notoriously almost impossible to use, and yet done by a bunch of brilliant programmers who each had their own vision for what their little thing should be. And you put 1,000 brilliant people's stuff together, and it's like it's as a bowl of spaghetti or something like that. Or one of my colleagues once said it's an angry fruit salad. All these things. Each individual piece of fruit might be nice, and so to control that, that's where you have to have that architecture. And that is harder to do because you really have to have some, either a person or a small team who really owns that or is in charge of that. And that has to live outside of things like really sort of small, rapid design cycles. If you're going to like do these sprints and you have a week or a month or whatever it is to do one thing, well, you have to have it be outside of that of that kind of running. You also got to like sit down and think and do the bigger design and information. I mean, it's information architecture, you might say, is kind of like was an early idea that kind of approached this, but we think we have a bigger experience architecture, and some really senior, really great designer needs to be in charge of that. And you could sort of say it's a little bit like back when Apple had Steve Jobs, that was almost like his unwritten title was experience architect. Actually, it ended up being Don Norman's title, the UX architect's office, but it really was Steve Jobs, I guess, who truly sort of said, we had this one vision for our product. And it shouldn't actually really be sort of a nerd like Steve Jobs, but it should be like more of a true UX person. But I think something like having good user interface architecture, and it's not an easy thing to do. We don't know a lot about how to do it. I mean, it's not really a strategy to say we'll assume we have a brilliant person that everybody will respect and who makes the right decisions. You can be lucky and you have that, but it's not a great strategy. So I don't think we necessarily have step-by-step advice for how to achieve great architecture, but that's what you need to have architecture as an overriding point beneath like individual design decisions.
Another area where we received a lot of questions that people want your insight on is kind of current events and things that are going on. So one of the questions that we received is how design can contribute to the current global state, specifically COVID-19, and how can we as humans focused on UX better help users, customers, and our communities? And this is from Jonathan in Malta.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, of course, in many ways, this is not specifically a design or software user interface issue. It's a medical issue. But that said, I think there's a variety of different things that we can do. So going back to this point, it is a medical issue. There's a lot of researchers, medical researchers working on making vaccines or making cures and whatever. And those guys all use software to do data analysis and all of that. And most of that has terrible user interfaces. And so doing better in doing these kind of complex data analysis. We're actually working on doing a course on that's going to be launched in a while. So, but we don't have that ready yet, and it's a very complicated thing to do. But for sure, doing better UX design on supporting actually scientists in general, but maybe specifically the scientists working on this problem, is right there. Would be a good thing. Then there's sort of the more general thing about talking about the general public. And we know that right now we have all these software collaboration sessions that we're doing right now. And these systems can for sure be better. I think they're already actually pretty good for targeting users like us, but we're super users. So, we discovered a few small usability problems, like in Zoom, like we had a lot of people when they were trying to click the flag for their country, they clicked the flag for some like obscure little Antarctic island that had the same flag because it was a Norwegian colony, but it wasn't Norway. But this doesn't really matter, and it's a small thing. But there are small usability problems in software like Zoom or Slack, but they're actually honestly pretty well designed for people like us. But we are not the broad public, right? And so really driving through that now we are talking about a factor at least 10, if not more, of broadening the scope of people using this type of software. In particular, and that becomes a huge usability issue. And in particular, we are talking about a lot of elderly users having to use it now, who maybe didn't use these things before. We all know when talking about the specific virus that people 70 and older, particularly 80 or older, are the big risk group. And so they have to be like 100% isolated, and they can't meet with their grandchildren or anybody else. So that's super isolating and very hard for those people. And yet, design these days really is not at all suitable for old people. And we've actually worked on this for years, and we have done reports on how to design for senior citizens. We've done reports on how to design for teenagers. And honestly, which you did. And honestly, the teenager report is selling much better than the seniors report. Most companies don't care about old folks, even though we have data available on how to design for them. And I think now we really need to design better for senior citizens, because we have a lot of people, and they can't rely on the old solution, which is, my grandson, who's a nice young man, came by and set up my computer for me. They can't even rely on that anymore. So these interfaces have to be really, really simplified dramatically for the senior citizens to really use them well. So I think that's where, in terms of like more large-scale impact, maybe dramatic simplification of these type of interfaces, and particularly in terms of designing for seniors, which is so blatantly ignored, that we can do much better.
So kind of related to that, in the current state that we're in, a lot of organizations and individuals have been forced into kind of a work from home experience and experiment. What are your thoughts on UX being 100% remote? Do you think that we can do it? And what are the biggest challenges for doing UX remotely?
I mean, I don't think we can do it 100%. I think it's just not possible. I mean, there are many things you want to do for really great user experience that requires you to be out with the users, like home visits. I mean, we did a project called Life Online where we went into people's houses, sat on their couch. Those are things that right now, would be considered, no, don't do that, right? But those are necessary for some of the deeper understanding, for really creating the next generation of deeper insight, new features type of things. But if you look at it in the more short term, and short term can certainly be a year, that we can certainly do a lot of our work remotely. I mean, we can definitely do remote usability studies, but remember, user testing is only one of a range of research methods. We can do a lot of design and collaboration we can do remotely. I mean, even at this conference, we've done a lot of the type of exercises, whether journey mapping or all different other exercises. We usually do like big posters on the wall. We do them on remote instead, and it's worked quite well. So I think that in the shorter term, we can do a lot of our things remotely. And there's also some benefits to that. Like one of the standard advice, this should be the advice for improving programmer productivity. There's two things to do that are the best things for programmer productivity. One was send all your programmers a touch typing course so they can type better. And the second is give them an individual office and close the door, lock those guys up in isolation, and then they can crank out the code. Because interruptions are terrible for programmers. Now, designers are a little bit different than programmers, but there's still a lot of work that we can do where actually sitting alone, you can double your productivity. But then there are other things where honestly, all these tools we're having now are still not the same as being together. And definitely for research, it's not the same. So if we want to think about 10-year perspective or longer term perspective, where we want to have like these bigger advances happen, that I don't think we can do 100%. But we can, in the short run, a year, the current year we're in or whatever, I think we can do many, many, many great things. We shouldn't like stop. I actually think this is maybe also sort of a point for us to remember is that, yeah, it's kind of sad right now and the world is in lockdown. I think 2.6 billion people are in lockdown right now, which is probably the biggest shared experience in the world, in world history, except maybe watching World Cup finals or something like that. But so that's sad. But on the other hand, we need to be positive and say, well, but we can also still work. We can do our share, right, and make things better for humanity as well. Even if you're sitting in your own house, you can still do a lot of work. I also want to say one more thing, which is going back to this point that some of the user research really is better in person. If you've already done it, this is of course too late if you haven't done it, but if you've already done it, you build up this kind of bank of understanding of users, and you can kind of like draw from that bank and use it to interpret these kind of somewhat weaker things that we can do right now, and you're going to be quite well off. So maybe there's something to remember when all this goes away, is like, well, that becomes the time to go and do more of that research and build up your bank of user understanding that then you can like kind of draw on if or when there's like a second wave and we all go back in lockdown again next year.
So the next area that I want to touch on is the future of UX. This is an area that we've gotten a lot of questions on. And though this particular question, the foldable smartphone, is actually in existence now, we got an attendee that wanted to know, what are your thoughts on the UX of the foldable smartphone?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great point about that. That used to be the future. I mean, I used to work on projects and talk about when we have it, and now we have it. So these things are happening. And first of all, I think that's great because the foldable smartphone, because the main thing about phones and mobile is that they have to be small, because the entire idea is you're going to have to carry it all the time. And you can't do that if it's the size of a desktop monitor or a newspaper or something like that, printed newspaper. So it has to be small. On the other hand, we know from basically almost every UX study ever done is that bigger screens are better. And with the bigger screen, you can see more, you have more context, more understanding. You don't have so many hidden features. Hidden features are terrible. Now, we did a study on the so-called hamburger menu, and anything on a desktop website, never ever do a hamburger menu because hidden features are not seen. If you do have the space, show people stuff. Showing people stuff enhances usability dramatically. Not having to scroll, everything I can see, I can glance on, I can understand much better. You don't rely on short-term memory so much, and all these things. So bigger screens are better, and yet, going back to the point about mobile, you got to carry it. Well, anyway, so even just that kind of clamshell, open it up like an oyster, you already got like twice the screen for the same amount of carrying your pocket space. And I could easily imagine another future product, right? And you can generalize this to be either you can unfold it 2 times, or becomes more like a scroll and you roll it up. Maybe we go back to like the old Romans, the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. They had these reading scrolls they could unroll like that. So you could have a rather big screen, even though it folds down to like a little space and you put it in your pocket. I could easily imagine that. And that is one of the ways of overcoming that paradox that big screens are vastly better, and yet it has to be carried. So there are other maybe approaches to that as well. Things like it's not even a screen, it's like in your glasses and it beams into your brain, into your eyeballs or something, which right now has not been so successful and seems a little bit awkward and annoying and all of that. That could be another future. Or there's the projection onto the wall from your ring or something like that, which of course is not great for privacy, I guess. But you can imagine a variety of other ways of overcoming that paradox of tension between carry it to be small, look at it big. But at least for the next few years, like this kind of foldable thing is probably the answer, or not the answer, but a way of alleviating or of improving on this paradox. I'm very keen on that, very happy about to see that develop.
So kind of in line with something like a foldable smartphone and looking at other innovative technologies, obviously voice interfaces, IoT, and VR, do you think that we'll have to come up with any new usability inspection methods, or would our classical methods still work for evaluating those interfaces?
Yes and no. I mean, the reason I say no is that things like the 10 usability heuristics are intended to be general and just talk about how people interact with features, really, and not so much about the specific technology. And therefore, they have actually been applied to things from mainframes, personal computers, mobile phones, smartwatches, games, 3D game type of environments. So these really basic principles actually apply across things. And the approach of doing inspection of where you judge interactions relative to known principles also tend to be the same. Now, there is an aspect of usability inspection that is, in addition to using generally known principles, you also use specific guidelines for the type of user interface you're designing. So if you're designing, let's say, investor relations site for a publicly traded company, well, we have specific information about, knowledge about how investors, both individual investors and institutional, mutual fund style investors, how they go and look for data and how they look at the charts and whatever. That's certainly not a general insight, but that's a specific insight for investor relations. And so if you're designing an investor relations site, you should furthermore use those guidelines. And so those we can get because we've tested already like 20 different investor relations sites and generalized from those. So we have that. But what we don't have is for like the next generation of weird technology. We haven't tested those yet. So when those things come out, right, the first thing we do is we get hold of like the first 20 things we can find, and we test those and we generalize across those. What are some of the things that tend to help or hinder users? And we can make that into guidelines. And so there always need to be these adaptations, because there's always new ways in which design can trip up people. New technology always has a lot of the old things come back to bite us once again. And then there's some new things too. And so that's when I go back to methodology-wise. We can basically call it competitive usability testing, but study a broad variety of designs that are using that technology. And then you're going to find a lot of specific guidelines for do or don't for that technology. In addition to the general things that have been true already for 30 years, and they will be true for the next 30 years, or the 30 years after that, and so forth, because they relate to, good old-fashioned brain there, which is the same.
So again, looking to the future of UX, what skills do you think that UX professionals need to gain and grow?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's not actually the most important, but just because we just talked about new technologies, I mean, certainly we need to keep up with the new technologies. But I think the more important one is really the insights into human behavior, where we have some of the more superficial insights, I think, already from many, many years of studying. So we know how to give good feedback and variety of all these things we always talk about. So those are things that are well worth keep studying those. But then I think we also need to be kind of moved levels beyond that in our understanding of human behavior and in really facilitating or helping people do more complex things. I mean, Doug Engelbart, who's the guy who invented the mouse, his project was really called Augmenting the Human Intellect. And the mouse was just a small thing in that, because like, okay, it's a faster way of pointing to stuff. It's a screen. That's just nice. But his bigger goal was never really met. We are still not really able to make people better decision makers, really better at understanding, or better at teaching or learning, right? I mean, online learning, well, we're trying it this week, and so I hope we've done well. You can tell us in the feedback forms. But honestly, we ought to be able to like dramatically better again on these type of things that are not quite, I think, well known yet. So it's a lot of things like that. I think we need to. So that would be my challenge, would be to try to move to the understanding of a deeper level of understanding and augmenting, not just making it possible for people to do things. That was our first challenge, because computers, we couldn't even do things in the early days. So, but now we need to move on to like the augmenting the human intellect type of problems, and they are much, much, much harder. And then I think in terms of like individual career development, I mean, definitely don't forget about just like the basic skills. All the type of things we teach in specific courses, the communication skills, all those things. I mean, they sound, oh, this is well known. Well, yeah, it's well known since we can have a course on it, but really honing those skills and really becoming like the true master, that can take many, many decades probably, actually. So it's well worth keeping at that, and not think, oh, because I already learned this, therefore I know how to do it now. No, you gotta like reflect back on your own professional performance, and you can have a colleague critique you, and then you could go back and critique the colleague. No constructive criticism, just positive spirit and all that. But everybody makes mistakes, when they do things, either blatant mistakes just because they overlooked something, or things that they just didn't really think about. I'm asking the questions a little bit wrong when I interview users or whatever. And if you have somebody else there with you and they give you that constructive feedback, that's one of the ways in which you can kind of improve your skills. So design critiques is a well-known method as well. But I think that kind of continuously refining your skills, even on sort of the well-known things that you already know, but knowing and then doing it right every time, those are sort of two separate things. And then doing it even better is the third thing.
So since that was kind of looking at the individual's future of UX, where do you see UX going in 20 years, 50 years, maybe even 100 years? What do you think the future looks like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that it's going to be dramatically much bigger than it is now. I actually wrote an article for our website, I think maybe 2 years ago now, where I did like a 100-year prediction for UX, where we are about halfway through that period from it started, before me, but I've already been in this field myself for what is like 37 years or something. So I've been there for a good time. And it's been a huge growth already in my career. But I think the growth is going to be even bigger going forward. Actually, going forward, the growth is going to be smaller in terms of exponential acceleration parameters. So, but as we all know, it seems like it's going flat, 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 and then boom, 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 boom. And that's what we are still to see. That real takeoff is yet to happen. So even though the field has become, several thousand times bigger already, it's going to be several thousand times bigger again to come, and that's going to happen over those next 30, 40 years. In terms of just number of people doing UX, number of companies moving up the maturity curve. I mean, most companies probably don't do anything yet, or if they do, it is at the very, very low level. There are very few at the very high level. So there's enormous growth potential over those next 30, 40 years. And so for anybody who's getting into the field now, they have kind of a 30-year career ahead of them. Those are the people who will see that true explosion happening. I mean, I saw the true explosion happening in percentage terms, but people starting now will see the true explosion in absolute terms, which has actually more impact on the world. So that, I think, is a huge thing. I think so. So I really think that technology will become better for humans, which is our kind of main goal over the next 30, 40 years. 100 years, that's much harder to predict, and actually, probably none of us who are on this call now will actually be around in 100 years. Sadly. So we don't know. We won't even see it. But I do think that one of the bigger changes there is artificial intelligence. And of course, it's much talked about now, and there's some primitive things being done right now. But that I think is really going to be dramatically different in 100 years. And we're almost turning into science fiction when you talk about like how is it going to be? Is it going to have these robots? Are we going to have, I don't even know what we're going to have. But I do know that it's all going to be still going back to the point about interaction between humans and technology and making the design so that they satisfy, the people can just figure out how to do it, but they also satisfy people's needs and they augment our intellect, which is again the bigger challenge. But I do think that there will be big advances made on that. These things are not advances that are easy, or is in 5 years and 10 years we have hugely changed everything. No, it takes much longer time because they're difficult problems to discover or research and also to implement. I mean, all respect for the engineers, they will have a very hard time implementing things we can invent when we go deep. And then there's going to be the social changes, cultural changes, which take even longer, can take generations. But if you look 100 years ahead, there's time for all of that. And so I do think it's going to be very, very different, and I think much more AI-based, but I have zero ability to predict what it actually will be. But I think that's going to be, I mean, I do think our field will have a very core part in developing that future.
So those were kind of a couple of the prepared questions that you all had submitted through the survey. So thank you all for doing that. We've gotten a ton of comments and questions throughout the chat. And again, thank you for all of that. Of course, we can't get to them all, but a couple that I thought were really interesting to ask. Jakob, is UX still the right term for what we do?
I mean, sometimes there's no correct term for what we do. It keeps changing. I hate that. I mean, just in my career, there's been at least 10, if not more, different that have been sort of the popular main terms. And if I'm going to make a prediction, I'll probably make a prediction that 5 or 10 years from now, there's going to be there's going to be another term that's going to be the most popular one. And this annoys me no end. I call it vocabulary inflation. And there's no reason to come up with new words for the same thing. If you're going to do something that's the old thing, but 5% different, don't make 100% different word for it. Just say it's the same thing, but I think we should do we should do this part of it different. Don't have to come up with a new name for it, right? That is very, very annoying and leads to a lot of confusion. But anyway, today I think UX is a great term. I think a lot of people actually understand it. I mean, it used to be when I was trying to say what I did. I mean, okay, now I'm going to try to explain to you guys. And these days, if I meet some new person, I can just say, well, I do user experience. I don't have to say, well, I'm like in the pioneering company. I do user experience. Oh yeah, we need more of that. You know? Okay. So it's nice right now because people know what it means, and I would hope let's just stick with it. That's my message.
Another question that we've gotten a lot of is, who is doing UX well? Are there any companies that you particularly like? Any websites that you particularly like?
Websites that I like. Actually, one that I do like is a rare little niche website. Is called nuts.com, and you can buy walnuts and other nuts there. So it's very specialized, and this is, I think, is one of the great ways of beating Amazon is to do something specialized. Then you can do that better. And they have all kind of neat features like reorder and whatever. So it's just a nicely well done site for doing pragmatic things. Other than that, it does tend to be the sites that do kind of things simple and stick to that and do it well. You know, it's much harder when sites try to do too many different things. I mean, feature right is a disease that has plagued us since the beginning. You know. And it happens easily on websites as well.
I'm thinking that nuts.com is going to have a lot of visitors now after you mentioning it. But kind of in that similar vein to End, you said that a lot of, those companies might be doing a lot of different things, trying to do a lot of different things well. For the UX professional, this is the question that we'll end on. Do you think that it's better to specialize in one area or be a general UX professional?
I think it's better to specialize because then you will drive up your skill level much more. I mean, I think it's very hard to become, well, I think it's actually almost impossible to be super great at everything. That just doesn't happen. I mean, even the most talented, like, let's say Leonardo da Vinci is a good example of that. I've actually been on an exhibition of his work, and you could just see he was like a scatterbrain. That guy, he was trying so many different things, and all of them they were very brilliantly well done, But as a result, he ended up not really inventing the helicopter, and only doing a few paintings and so forth, right? So I think it's actually better to specialize and stick to one thing, and then actually become extremely, incredibly great at it. I think that's a way to have a larger impact. I think the generalist, I mean, there's certainly benefit for generalists if you're on a small project, because communication is the bane of a lot of what we do. And if you have to, especially if you have even just two people, right, you all got to communicate, and you lose something in the communication. So if you can do everything, communication is optimal inside your own brain, right? So there's an advantage to that. I'll just have to admit that, but it just doesn't scale. The size of problem that you can solve as one person is very small scale problem. So you gotta have more people. As soon as you have more people, well, you have that communication overhead, unfortunately. But then at the other end, you could have the benefit of each person being optimal at specific things. This is, by the way, also one of the oldest lessons in economics. If you read what's it called, The Wealth of Nations, I think it was called. The entire idea was like, how do you make more pins? And if you make more pins in a factory, if each worker specializes in doing one part of the pin, instead of one person making a pin and another person also making a pin, the entire thing, those guys back in England, like 200-300 years ago, made very few pins per person per day. And then once they started specializing, whoa, the productivity went way up, and they could use, and the price of a pin went to nothing as a result, basically. So it's not something I came up with, that specialization tends to create better results, but I do think it does.
Thank you, Jakob. Those are all the questions that we'll have time for today. So thank you again for being here with us, and thank you all the attendees. One quick thing before everyone jumps off, at NNG we love data, so we have a poll that we'd like to get your feedback on. All responses are anonymous, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's Q&A.